Today is October 4th. It's the 278th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. On this day in 1957, the Soviet Union launches Sputnik 1, the Earth's first artificial satellite, the first human-made spacecraft of any kind launched into orbit around the Earth. The launch of Sputnik on this day is the start of the space race between the USSR and the United States that will culminate with the landing of an American spacecraft and the first human to walk on the moon 12 years later in 1969. Sputnik 1, also known as Satellite 1, is a 183-pound aluminum sphere 2 feet in diameter. Inside Sputnik is a transmitter with a single watt of power that transmits a beep as it orbits the Earth for 21 days. Then the transmitter runs out of power, and Sputnik is then just a hunk of metal in orbit until it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere in January of 1958. The launch of Sputnik is a shock to the system for America. Most Americans are surprised to learn that the Soviets have launched a satellite that's able to fly over the United States in space. The notion stokes fear in the heart of Americans. It's the early days of the Cold War, of nuclear missiles and new technologies, and many in the U.S. fear falling behind the USSR in this age of technological advancement. The Soviets have been working on a satellite for nearly 10 years now. They plan a far more complex and intricate satellite than the one launched on this day in 1957. But 2 years earlier, in the summer of 1955, the U.S. announces plans to launch a satellite for the International Geophysical Year, an international scientific project scheduled to take place from July 1957 to December 1958. The Soviets put their complex satellite design on the back burner and rush a much simpler concept into development in a bid to beat the Americans to space. This really is the start of the space race between the two superpowers in the summer of 1955. But it's when the Soviets surprise America and the world by launching Sputnik on this day in 1957, atop an R-7 intercontinental ballistic missile, that the space race gets kicked into high gear, and both the USSR and the United States start sprinting towards the launch of the first man in space, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, and landing the first man on the moon, American astronaut Neil Armstrong. While Sputnik begins circling the Earth, emitting its beep on this day in 1957, it crosses over a number of different countries with each orbit, establishing the precedent of freedom of space, that crossing national boundaries in space does not violate national airspace. On this day in 2006, Wikileaks is launched by Australian computer programmer Julian Assange. Wikileaks.org is intended as a multinational platform for the publication, analysis, and retention of, quote, large data sets of censored or otherwise restricted official materials involving war, spying, and corruption. Assange calls WikiLeaks, quote, a giant library of the world's most persecuted documents. Julian Assange is born in Townsville, Queensland, in Australia in 1971. His parents run a traveling theater, so he grows up on the road. Assange excels at math, and the advent of the internet in the 1990s affords him the opportunity to use his abilities, though he doesn't always use them for good. In 1987, he begins hacking, under a pseudonym, of course, Mendax. Along with a group of hackers, he hacks into a wide variety of Fortune 500 companies, international corporations, and U.S. Defense Department systems and manufacturers. In 1994, Assange is arrested. He pleads guilty and escapes prison time by paying a fine and agreeing to be on his best behavior. In 1997, he co-authors a book on subversive elements on the internet, and in 1999, he publishes a copy of a patent for voice data harvesting technology, granted to the National Security Agency, the NSA, noting that, quote, "This patent should worry people." In 2006, Assange and a group of similarly minded activists connect online and create a dead letter box for government and corporate leaks, providing a safe haven and secure means of dissemination for any whistleblower who wishes to expose documents revealing what they deem to be corruption or abuses of power. The resulting repository, Wikileaks.org, is launched on this day in 2006. Its original website based with an Icelandic organization called Sunshine Press. Since then, Wikileaks has grown in scope and security, hosted on dozens of servers around the world, maintained by a small team of dedicated anonymous volunteers, supported by donations, and represented by the public face of Julian Assange. Some of the leaks leaked by WikiLeaks include the ClimateGate emails from the University of East Anglia, England, a confidential report on the embezzlement of billions of dollars of government funds by Kenyan President Daniel Arap Moi, secret Scientology manuals, Sarah Palin's private emails, and even a 2008 report by the Army Counterintelligence Center about the potential threat to the Army posed by WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks publishes that. The leak that puts WikiLeaks on the map, however, is what they call Project B, the Apache helicopter video from a 2007 airstrike in Baghdad that leaves 18 civilians dead, including 2 journalists working for Reuters, who are fired upon after pilots mistake their camera and equipment for rocket launchers. WikiLeaks posted this video in early 2010. This video, combined with a dump of classified documents pertaining to the war in Afghanistan, is what turns up the heat on WikiLeaks. The organization is now very much on the radar of the U.S. government and other coalition governments. U.S. authorities explore espionage charges against Assange and WikiLeaks. And in late 2010, Assange is accused of sexual assault in Sweden. He denies the allegations, but is placed under house arrest in the UK, where he's residing at the time. In June of 2012, when it's clear the UK plans to extradite him to Sweden to stand trial, Assange goes to the Ecuadorian embassy in London and requests asylum. After living in the embassy for 2 months, he's granted asylum. But he's unable to travel to Ecuador, what with the British bobbies waiting for him outside the door of the embassy, which is technically Ecuadorian soil. So he stays in the embassy in London. And as of this recording, Julian Assange, who founds WikiLeaks on this day in 2006, is still there in the Ecuadorian embassy. The UN has declared him a victim of arbitrary detention by the UK, and calls for him to walk free and be duly compensated for his imprisonment. There are 88 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. You know that. On this day in 2004, Spaceship One, designed by Burt Rutan, wins the Ansari X Prize for being the first private industry reusable manned spacecraft to fly into space and return to Earth twice in 2 weeks. So if you're still listening, beep, beep, beep. Talk to you tomorrow.